But yet our people were able to survive, literally, I will say, because we still had our languages. We knew who we were. We could adapt somehow to being moved, you know, 800 miles away from our homeland. And we could start again because we still knew who we are. And all of that is, a big risk for us. And that's the big challenge that we're working on. And that's why our languages are so critical to us.
Aloha, welcome to Cooper Union. What's happening with human rights around our world? And I'm very honored to be speaking to you live at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues 25th annual session. And today we're looking at the important issue of language. And I'm very honored to be joined with Dr. Richard Grounds. And Richard, thanks you so much for speaking with us tonight. Can you share why language is so crucial and one of the most important issues regarding international human rights law?
Kala asakwa hoto e ko chatla ko wedene da bale ko chatla ko wedene hile pohe ake a chitne hile tele yupa on quante. Our language is so basic, it's so core to everything that matters, everything that is important in our uh, traditional way of life, our indigenous way of thinking, our ceremonies, uh, our prayers, our stories, our histories, our knowledge of the land, our knowledge of the stars. Yes, it really is all of that. It sounds, kind of extreme or like I'm reaching or what have you. But yeah, I think it is really the core to who we are. Our indigenous people, as you know, I'm thinking I'll just use our example here of the Yuchi people, of the Yuchi Nation. Our people were in what became the colonial states of Georgia and Alabama 200 years ago. And of course, we were death marched out of there in a brutal process. Um, and our people were under assault, taking our lands, our resources, attacking our uh, culture and traditions, and outlawing our ceremonies, all of these things. But yet our people were able to survive, literally, I will say, because we still had our languages. We knew who we were. We could adapt somehow to being moved, you know, um, 800 miles away from our homeland. And we could start again because we still knew who we are. And all of that is, a big risk for us. And that's the big challenge that we're working on. And that's why our languages are so critical to us.
I agree. I mean, it's absolutely the core of one's existence on Earth. And it also defines how one sees the world, how one shares the world, and also
Oh,
that deepest understanding the relationship with the land and with the natural surroundings.
yes, yes. Well, that's well articulated, and that's part of what we're trying to do at our Yuchi Language Immersion School is really help our students to understand how critical the language is to shaping our understanding of the world, how we see the world, how we speak the world, how we live in the world. Um, in our language, in the Yuchi language, which is a language isolate, meaning there's no other really related language known on the planet, um, everything that we talk about is always in relationship to the earth. So in English, you have the word the, the door, the I don't know, pencil, the ball, but all of those are different in our language. The word the is different in each case because of the relationship of those items to the earth itself. And that is to say, we're constantly looking at the earth in our connection to the earth, our relation to the earth. There's no other way to speak it in our language without literally articulating in virtually every sentence our relationship to the way we're connected to the earth. Um, so we say Yudashi Fa, the door, the, for something that stands tall on the earth, or Gasotline A, like for a pencil, the A at the end is would be where you would, in English, you would put the, but that's because it's something that lies along the earth. Dak Chi, the chi denotes something that sits upon the earth. So these are all actually literally different ways of just saying the. It has to do if a person is standing there, you have to denote that they're standing. You can't just say they're there. They are standing there or sitting there or lying there, if whether it's yourself or a Yuchi person or a non-Yuchi, all of that is built into our language. In our language, we can't even really say, English, they have this expression, they might ask somebody, do you own a horse? Literally, you can't say in our language that you own a horse. You don't own the horse. You might say, but I wait out there. I put a horse there. I put it there. You can talk that way, but we don't really have a way to say, I own a horse. In other words, I'm just saying our language is just so rich in terms of training our minds to see the world in a direct physical relationship that our people through our language have with the land, literally. And of course, on the other end of it, our real name for ourselves, of course, is not actually Yuchi, it's Soyaha, meaning people of the sun. So there's the cosmic connection as well. It's not just the earth, but literally we're interconnected with the entire created world, the entire universe.
I
That's what our
appreciate that.
language, that's what our language tells us. Yeah.
No, and it reminds me of talking with the indigenous peoples of Botswana. They're also getting to the point where it's no longer allowing people to call them San Bushmen because they have their own language for themselves. So, like you said, it's
Oh,
even self-identification, and then
oh,
it's how one expresses themselves in connection to nature. And I
yes,
think that's the richness, right? And it also points, though, how one culture sees the world as transactional or commodified, and with
yes,
indigenous, it's not extractive, it's a mutual exchange, and it's
yes.
sharing
Oh,
the
oh,
interconnectedness.
yes, yes. So at our UT Language Immersion School out in Glenpool, south of Glenpool, Oklahoma, south of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the old oil capital of the world of 100 years ago, this whole extractive, ugly process that was so destructive to our indigenous communities was really a very brutal process. Now we're back on that land running this immersion school and reconnecting through our language to the land so that it's not just language, shall we say, in a classroom or on a chalkboard or kind of artificially being addressed in some kind of a exercise that's not meaningful or directly connecting to the land. We're literally uh, getting our kids out involved in the landscape with traditional animals. We've brought back the uh, Waidinga, the buffalo. We've been doing a buffalo dance for 200 years as we were kicked out of our old homeland, but we had lost that connection to actual living connection with the buffalo. So we've been able to reclaim that connection by having, that direct, being able to harvest buffalo and live in connection with them again. Um, and the first time in generations, many generations. So, anyway, all that to say, it is literally this reconnecting to the land that is I think is really a critical part of reclaiming the language. It's not just somehow in a test tube or in a vacuum somewhere or a kind of artificial four-wall classroom. It's really trying to live the language in the land, in restoring our traditional activities and lifestyle to the
In a
extent that
way, in a way, you brilliantly summarized it, right? When you look at colonization, it comes first with banning the language so that people can't communicate and try to make sure that it takes away the power, that natural power of identification. But then also the other aspect of bringing in the Bible and then people losing their land and taking over the land. So it shows also the interconnectedness of human rights and why maybe the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is so powerful, because in 46 articles, it in a way shows what devastating actions had been done by colonizers and settler
yes,
states,
yes,
but also provides a roadmap of how we go forward by addressing those
yes,
violations. And as we're here, we're looking almost, we're on the dawn of the 20th commemoration of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I think we can both develop deeply if we look at Article 13 and
oh,
14 and 15, that looks at those aspects. But I definitely think that that maybe then provides a potential path on how we can make sure we revitalize languages, as you say, and reconnect with the land.
oh. I can't. So I think that's such a critical connection. We are literally trying to um, reclaim land in a system that has, made promises in the past that the land, of course, would be ours as long as the sun shines, as long as the rivers
Yeah.
flow, until, of course, oil was found, and all of that was undone. Um, and so we literally had to go to the bank to borrow money, pay high interest just to buy. We're literally like buying back our own land. So this is the process, the kind of desperate nature of what we're doing. And since then, we've had wonderful support from partners who've come in to help us. But the process has been one in that we just felt like it was so critical to get back to the land that we needed a home base so that we could carry on our language in a more complete, more full, more natural way. So that's been a key part of that process.
And that reminds me of like the first times that we met, it was so exciting to compare and contrast and then coordinate to see how Olelo Hawaii Hawaiian language is coming back, and also to see the amazing process that you've been engaging in. And it really brings to life, it actualizes the articles, because Article 13 says Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, and traditions. As you were getting into it, philosophies, writing systems,
Yes,
literatures, and to really, once again, to designate and retain own names for communities, places, and persons. That's crucial,
yes,
right? It's those
yes,
settler societies trying to make indigenous peoples invisible, but through your stories, it really shows more of being invincible and how strong indigenous culture is and the power of language in Article
yes,
13, but then
yes,
definitely Article 14 that you were describing, the right to establish and control one's own educational systems and
yes.
institutions. And I think that's what gets to what you're saying. You're actually putting these words into practice, quote, and continuing providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to their cultural methods of teaching and learning. So
Oh,
that's the exciting part, to see how you've
oh,
been able to do that with the Buffalo, with the creative curriculum that you've been coming up with. I think that's what's so powerful. And it's so good to see you every year at the permanent forum over
oh,
these decades and to see what you've been able to do and show why this declaration going on its 20th anniversary next year is crucial
oh,
when we look at language.
oh, absolutely. And just, to draw the contrast with the public school system, we work, some of our partners include the Cochiti Pueblo language program, and they've been coaching us and helping us with their Montessori method. And we've set staff there to learn through their program. But part of their uh, messaging, part of what they talk about is that across the United States, Native American students, on average, are barely above 50% finishing high school. That is a failing grade. And the last time, um, well, the first time I was at a NIEA conference in Honolulu, I think that was like over 20 years ago or something in that range. Um, and it was stunning to me to learn that the um, Hawaiian immersion school programs were having 100% high school graduation rate. And then we just took a group of our staff over to learn from the Hawaiian programs this past summer, this year. And I literally was checking that same question. Is this true? Could this still be the case? And they said, yes, they're still getting 100% graduation. It's absolutely stunning. In other words, the traditional education system is, I think 50% is a failing grade in most grading systems.
Yeah.
It's not serving our youth, our communities, our peoples. And a key part of it is, a big part of it is, as you were noting, a lot of it is because those systems are so hostile to our languages, they're hostile to our worldview, to our systems of governance, to our ways of engaging in the physical world in an interactive way. Every morning, our students uh, greet the zona, and we have an ancient process where we bathe in the sun's rays. Um, and this I think is really important for our young people to recognize, understand that they are connected to the sun, that they are part of this amazing creation, not that they're just somehow above it or somehow superior or whatever that kind of colonial mentality seems to uh, push for so strongly.
And it that's one of the aspects that it shows also the commonality of the challenges, but also the strength in seeing the similarities and standing in solidarity towards education, because it's the same in Hawaii. We do an oli or a chant that sort of puts your mind right to then say, I'm going into this classroom and it's sacred. I'm going to be able to exchange knowledge and be able to learn, and that will then be able to provide me, the good way to live and to ensure well-being for not only myself but for one another. And so it sounds similar. And even in
Yes.
Hawaiian language, there's called the Eala E, and that's the chant to actually bring the sun up from darkness to the day. So
Um,
it's it's great to hear how your connection is for your people with the sun, and it's great to see how in Hawaii it's also similar yet unique, but we understand each other in that important part of that rich reciprocal relationship with the environment. And then it also gets into even Article 15, right? Because it's
mm,
not enough to just be able to learn. It's then making sure that cultures, tradition, histories,
oh,
aspirations are in education, but also public information. And
oh,
making sure, as you talked about too, though, that it goes to combating prejudice, that it goes to setting up good relations and better understanding.
oh,
And 16, what I know you've been doing too is establishing own media and own language,
oh,
and to make sure that there's a measures then by the state to make sure that media can thrive. And those are
oh.
some of the exciting aspects that are brought in this cooperation of what we're describing and sharing together.
I can't. And just to throw in one specific element of the kind of push, you may remember some of this when the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues began opening up that first year. I had already been, in grad school in Princeton. I ran into this publication that literally said in the reference section of the library, if you could feature this, it literally said that Uchis, that's us, that they are an extinct hunting and gathering tribe. And it literally said we were extinct. It was absolutely stunning to read this. And then if that wasn't clear enough, it repeated it at the end of the this short section on the extinct Yuchi Nation. It was just absolutely incredible to me, and I went back home. I began finding more and more of these references to Yuchi as Yuchi people, Yuchi Nation as extinct. It was hard to comprehend, but when I went back home, our founding elder for the Yuchi Language Project, Mose Kawi, began saying in his prayers after that, every time he was giving a public prayer at a ceremony or some gathering, he would say, Yutihane no Sonkene no. We Yuchi people, we're still here. And, that just became, you know, based in the language. We know we're here because we're still speaking
saying
this
it.
language, that the language that is given to us by the Creator. And so, if you remember some of those early days, I started going to the permanent forum, and every year I would try to take the floor and say, we need to have a UN International Year of Indigenous Languages, and try to get people on board with that program. And finally, after 16 years, they did declare it in 2019, and that was an important moment because it really elevated the essential importance of our indigenous languages to our survival, to our health. This year at the Permanent Forum, we're talking about health matters, and I want to say there's nothing more critical to the health of our nations than the status of our languages, particularly, I'll say, among our youth. So,
No, that's a great example of a measurement, right? To really
uh,
show, and it shows how human rights is the way to measure if there is peace, if there is development, if
oh,
there's those other elements of Security Council and Economic Social Council.
oh,
And as you shared that, it is true. But then it also gets me to think what's been great about the Permanent Forum that we've both been at for decades now is it begins and it's improved every year. But you have Sid Hill from the Onondaga Nation beginning the meeting,
oh,
not in one of the official 6 languages of the UN, but in
yeah,
his own language of the Onondaga of the Haudenosaunee that then is translated into the 6 languages of the UN.
oh,
And it's not just a hi, welcome here to country.
oh, oh,
It is this is our philosophy, our Thanksgiving.
oh,
And it reminds me of the story Willie Littlechild said, where he said, hey, when I come from treaties, which is Treaty 6, which is celebrating its 150th year, he said we have to begin each conference with a prayer. And of course, Madam Diaz, the chair of the working group, like, we don't pray at the UN. And more importantly, says, how long will this take? But now we know from today on April 20th, 2026, it could take 10 minutes, it could take 20 minutes. And it
oh,
describes that unique relationship with the
oh,
land. And
oh,
even though it took a while, and they declared the International Year of Indigenous Language, which is absolutely
oh,
essential in 2019, maybe you could
oh,
share what happened in that first year and why that was significant. And I think we can talk about UNESCO. So that's how the UN functions, the Permanent Forum. We find an issue that's imminent to peoples on the ground, and then we look at what global agencies responsible and then create a partnership. And
oh,
that is a
oh,
way, some of the beauty of the Permanent Forum, that it would take forever to find out what is UNESCO, where is it based, how would I
yes,
talk to them? But instead of having you have the whole world in one room. We're all in room
oh,
4,
oh.
and we
Okay.
can then coordinate together.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was so uh, excited, pleased, felt blessed that the International Year had been parlayed into the decade. I was only involved in the push for the year piece. I wasn't directly connected to the decade development, but it was the perfect. And I think in terms of indigenous, the international indigenous uh, progress and movement forward, it was a critical move because it really continued to keep the focus on the core of our cultures, on the uh, important nature of the survival of our languages, which is connected to everything that matters about who we are, about how we engage the world. And so it's just really been a critical piece for us to be able to have the decade to elevate our languages. I think one of the big challenges of it is, there's kind of an academic side that wants to analyze our languages that wants to crank out dictionaries, and that's not necessarily anything wrong with a dictionary in and of itself, but I'm thinking particularly of our smaller language communities like us. We have handfuls of elder speakers to help us carry forward our language. So in those situations, the most critical thing to do is get the language to the youth coming up so that they can begin to speak and engage and laugh and pray in their language. That's the critical piece, not necessarily getting a lot of kind of formal description of the language passed through an academic or linguistic process. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. I will say, I'll confess on this conversation, I do have a French Cassell's dictionary. It's about 3 inches, 4 inches thick. Uh, Jamais les mots. Uh, all the words are in there. Mais alors, je ne parle pas bien français, n'est-ce pas? My French is still lousy, but I've got the big dictionary. I've got all the words, but that's a completely different project. So we've really focused on breath to breath, face to face, live community based, grassroots level language learning, which we think is the most critical piece of it for us, rather than, kind of um, academic or uh, electronic digital fixes.
No, and it reminds me, I remember being with the Ainu people in Japan, in Hokkaido, and
Mm.
they were working on trying to get the declaration adopted to be recognized as indigenous peoples in Japan. And Kayano Shigeru was a member of parliament and he wrote the dictionary, right? So, I mean, that is exciting too to be able to see it, especially it reminds me of another books. There's a carnival called Punahou Carnival. And I would always go there because you'd find the most racist backward books that talk about extinct and all those aspects, but everyone's still here. And so it's exciting to challenge those books and live it.
Yes.
And it you have to
Yes.
do it academically, but like you said, it's the songs, it's the melee, it's seeing it alive in ways on a daily basis that doesn't matter more, but is equally important. And now, as you mentioned, it's exciting because in Hawaii now you can go from kindergarten from Mahapunana all the way through PhD. And then you make me understand how important that is and how far it's come. Yet, one of the best parts of COVID for me was being in an Olelo class every
Uh,
Tuesday night and getting better. But it's one of those
oh,
things of it's a whole lifetime. And remind me of
that's
something I saw tonight.
mm,
The permanent forum member Maori from Aotearoa, she
mm,
was emceeing an event about a movie that they made in Canada looking at music. And it
mm.
then was filming First Nations of Canada singing all the different songs in different places. And one
Oh,
scene you just love, it was sort of the throat singing, and it was at
mm,
sunset. And you could see their breath in the sun, and they were going back and forth. "Oh, la, la," and it was so powerful. But the rhythms of the land, one of the people who described being involved with that project said, I don't speak my own language, and I'm learning it from a student who learned it from my father. But Emma,
mm.
I thought, was so profound. She said, we can't shame each other anymore. Like it wasn't our fault that we don't speak our languages. And it's good to have all the different stories on where we all come and how we
Oh,
come to the language. And
oh,
then the most important is practicing it, like you said, in that face to
oh.
face.
Yes, yes. And just one quick word, and we might talk about it another time when
Sure.
we have more space. But um, I think the one of the most critical things that we've been able to do with our UT language uh, project and getting the language to our children and having the language spoken in our ceremonies, in our communities, is making the language an everyday thing, not just something that happens in a classroom, not just something that happens maybe on an online exercise or something, but literally a living part of the daily life of the community. And I think that's been a really important part of because at this point we're running a school. I'm a second language learner. You know, my grandmother grew up not knowing English, but we only learned so much Yuchi from her as kids. You know, was never fluent at all, not trying to create that impression. So we're having to pick it up. And then my daughter said, you know, when I grow up and I start having babies, I'm going to raise them in Yuchi language. You know, a lot of kids say things, you know, big ideas, but she literally did that. And that really, I think, was inspirational for other young families because they could see it actually in a real life instance. Here were the kids laughing and playing and arguing in the Yuchi language, and they wanted that for their families, for their kids, and that really began a growing nucleus of young parents who were themselves second language learners. So we've taken the responsibility of growing the parents' language and the kids' language, and it's a beautiful, amazing process.
And just what you showed actually shows the resilience to be able to come back from where you said, parents didn't speak English, and then you not being able, but then now being there, and then your daughter actually bringing to life your dreams just
Oh,
shows how that could be transmitted. And then that's also what the decade is, right? There's this international decade of indigenous languages from 2022 to 2032.
oh,
And that was a key outcome. So these symbolic International Year of Indigenous Language, which you pushed for so long, which then UNESCO gets behind, which then creates a decade, is important because it's what's next. And uh,
yes.
Willie Littlechild was sharing today how his community then translated the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into his own Cree language. And then it's that process of then seeing that declaration, but envisioning what it means to people today and what it would mean historically. So it's all those ways, but I think the way you described it is the most beautiful part, that it's alive and living. And that's
Yeah.
the same thing in Hawaii as well as, and you've seen it, some films like Star Wars or films like Lilo and Stitch have been translated into the indigenous
Oh,
languages, and you see
oh,
everybody sitting there watching it, as well as Moana for the
oh,
Pacific.
oh,
And then that's where it's not something sterile. It's not something you're doing at school. And I think the one part, like you said, we have many times we can talk more with teachers and the students who are living it. It also makes you stronger. It wasn't a thing of a distraction. If you learn an indigenous language, you couldn't come up with English or the others. We find out people are more polyglot and able to speak many languages.
oh, oh. Yeah, the research that has been done um, all shows that learning your indigenous language actually helps you overall as a student, even in kind of, unexpected areas like English language classes or English writing classes. Literally, in mathematics, I mean, these wouldn't seem to be obvious places that knowing your language would help, but that's what the research has been showing. So it's very powerful and very important for the healing and growth of our communities. And of course, not to forget, we've kind of referred to it, but uh, it is, as you're saying, it is about all coming together. It is about supporting one another. It is about learning from different indigenous neighbors and even distant neighbors. It was such a blessing for our group to see the amazing things that you all are doing out there with the language in Hawaii, and to be able to see that, to be able to visit the schools was just really inspiring for us. We've had help from Cheyenne, Arapaho, Buffalo programs. They come over and help us, teaching us because, the Cheyenne never really stopped harvesting buffalo. They still knew practically hands-on how to do this. Well, we haven't been doing it for 150 years or something. So yeah, so it's very amazing to have that kind of support. And our Cherokee brothers come to help us learn how to make a dugout canoe that we haven't made, I would say, close to 200 years, likely. So, all these ways of supporting one another and coming together around the language is just very beautiful and very powerful, and I think really healthy for our youth coming up.
And since you did bring up Vaka, that was one of the things I was thinking of, wayfinding and voyaging. And it was
Yes.
indigenous peoples also from Micronesia sharing their knowledge with the people of Hawaii. And as you said, when you're wayfinding, you're doing all the math, you're doing all the science, you're doing all the history. So then it shows how everything comes together. And in a way, that fractured world that has been ruptured by colonization can be made whole again, and see the
Yes.
ways of the ancestors in that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the important part, right? It's also the vital. Willie Littlechild pointed out that they said every 2 weeks an indigenous language dies, right? So it's that point of how do we challenge that? And one idea is a UN Convention on Indigenous Languages might be a result of this decade.
Yes, I think that is an important goal. I think we should work to try to make that happen. We were very blessed when we came uh, to the Big Island that we had Kaimana help us, and I really pushed him. Explain to us this incredible knowledge, this incredible indigenous knowledge about how you can voyage the globe, without a compass, without the European instruments, and just absolutely inspiring, to be able to have that shared with us. Yeah, absolutely. Just like overwhelming. It's just almost like magic. It's beautiful. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and in closing, the way you described that, it reminds me too of when Hokulea came around the world and stopped at the UN, and Ban Ki-moon met them across from the UN at the dock, and they sailed past the Statue of Liberty. It was the first time I really genuinely saw ambassadors and governments respect indigenous peoples. At the Permanent Forum, there's dialogue, there's negotiation, there's contemplation, there's struggle, but there they just sat in awe. When Nainoa Thompson shared, this is where we've sailed from in 5 years, this is where we've gone around the world, and this is how we do it. It was pure respect for indigenous knowledge, and it was the ultimate example of expressions of self-determination.
Okay. That's beautiful. I'm really glad you mentioned that. And again, the pushback is the more we elevate our languages, the rich knowledge that comes with it, the harder it is for the colonial model of kind of pushing people down because of their falsely claimed to be, crude languages or simple languages. And, the richness, the knowledge is just immense and really stunning, absolutely amazing. Yapahe'e, we say in our language, yapahe'e. And when we work together, okajutahe okonfete, together we can move it forward. Okay, onko'wedete.
There's definitely a lelo noi ao similar in Hawaiian as well. And that's the beauty of everyone singing the same song. And it's that song that listens to the rhythms of the earth. And we could definitely keep going all day talking, but I really appreciate your time. More importantly, I really appreciate what you've been able to accomplish, sharing just in your family, how that's been done, and how that then changes an entire page of that book of history to show a very vibrant future going forward.
Okay, netiachi alikano tahe onkonfete.
Aloha, and thank you so much for joining us today on Cooper Union. Thank you for being part of this transformative conversation. If you'd like to support Cooper Union and help us continue these compassionate, creative, courageous conversations, you can find more information in the description.